It finally happened. The Holy Grail. Legacy of Kain's Soul Reaver and its famous cut content has now been fully exposed. Its secrets laid bare for all to see, thanks to the lost levels of Soul Reaver 1 and 2 Remastered by Crystal Dynamics, Aspyr, and Saber Interactive. These cut fragments of Soul Reaver 1 have been a myth and legend among the fandom for so long that it's a dream come true for many fans to see these levels finally brought to life in some manner. But hold up, let's rewind a little for those unfamiliar with this epic tale and lay out exactly how the levels were lost and how it all came together to bring them life once more. Soul Reaver was first released in 1999, but its initial release was far from simple. It had been the subject of a legal battle over the rights to the series, and the game had been ambitious to a fault. In many ways, the ambition and groundbreaking desire was what had elevated the title to cult status. But in the rush to realise its ambition, the game had already suffered almost a year of delays. Soul Reaver was marked in the gaming media as one to watch, and the hype built as promotional material and guides were released, but the game was not. And eventually, something had to give. Reluctantly, with deadlines looming, the developers made the difficult decision to cut the last levels, rearrange the content to make use of what they had, and to bolt on what would be described as an inelegant to be continued ending. But even after its successful release, questions began to be asked about the content of Soul Reaver. Early promotional materials had mentioned a lot of content that was nowhere to be seen in the final release, with numerous environmental Reaver enhancements, areas and bosses apparently missing from the final game. As fans began to explore the game files, it was soon clear that there were even remnants of this material left in the final release, as the voice files detailed some of the story that had been left on the cutting room floor. Developers admitted that the retail ending was indeed not the originally intended outcome of the game, and the last few areas had indeed been cut, along with a lot of side content that would have ended up with the game being about a third bigger than the retail release. The lost levels of Soul Reaver became a legend, and the fans whispered tales of the lost history. 5 elemental Reaver enhancements and their forges, 2 amplified Reaver enhancements gained from imbuing the blade with the souls of important characters, a lost spirit glyph in its altar, 3 special abilities, 4 deleted areas, 3 deleted boss encounters, including a third and final boss encounter with Kain, and a final climactic sequence that would have seen Raziel wipe out every vampire in Nosgoth at the pinnacle of the silenced Cathedral. Over the years, fans slowly began to piece the story together and work out how it all fit, with the broad strokes known for many years and catalogued by sites like the Lost Worlds, Legacy of Kain Wiki, and the Ancient's Den, and discoveries of early prototype builds helped illuminate the development processes. But it wasn't until 2020 that the fandom really got to view the cut content for the first time, as the exposure of the so-called alpha builds by the aforementioned sites showed us the majority of the content, albeit in a highly unstable and unfinished form. We'll link those in the description so you can look over those videos to see for yourself. But the discoveries didn't stop there, and hints over the last few years have abounded over a long-lost archive of Crystal Dynamics materials that could finally explore the full details of what was planned. Today, with the release of Soul Reaver 1 and 2 Remastered and the museum piece of the lost levels, you can explore for yourselves the lost levels of Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver in a way that simply wasn't possible with previous discoveries. And with a little dash of behind-the-scenes knowledge, we're here to guide you through the full picture of what could have been. While a lot of the big changes come towards the end of the game, we can actually still say quite a bit about the differences in the main game. There was an original plan, and when that was cut, they didn't simply put up walls to block progress. They reshuffled and rearranged what they had to refocus the game, changing a lot of the progression and experience of the game as a whole. One example of this kind of early change was in boss order. In the retail game, the player defeats Melchiah in the Necropolis, uses the phase ability to reach the Sanctuary of the Clans, where they battle Kain and get the Wraithblade, which is then used to open the sealed door to enter the silenced Cathedral. But the initial plan was for players to carry straight on from the Necropolis to the silenced Cathedral. Phasing would have allowed Raziel to enter the Cathedral with no sealed door present, and he would have needed to climb through a high passage to reach the Sanctuary of the Clans. And that's to say nothing of cut puzzles and areas within the Cathedral, hinting at extra endgame content. In the original designs, gaining the Wraithblade meant force projectiles were gained with it by default, and the Tomb Guardian was just a regular enemy with no extra bravado. It was only with the cuts did the Tomb Guardian gain a speaking role, taking the lines of deleted boss Turel, and his encounter granted the ability to fire projectiles separate from the Reaver. And by the retail build, this had become a physical relic granted by the encounter, which allowed projectiles to be fired both unarmed and when using the Reaver. The next change of real note was at the end of Duma's boss battle. Here, the entire position of the next level was moved. Rather than having to backtrack outside the ruined city, the rear courtyard of the city would lead up a snowy canyon to the Oracle's cave, which much better matched up with its position on the maps in Blood Omen. For the retail version of the game, the passage leading to the canyon was blocked, and the Oracle's cave moved to occupy the position of the now deleted Turelim Territory. Then of course we have the optional extras, like the Glyph altars and the Elemental Reaver forges. The majority of these were removed from the retail game, but those that remained were treated as exploratory extras, small bonuses with extra powers for the players to find. But this was not always intended to be the case. They were in fact intended to be vital to progression, and a blockade near the end of the game would require all of them to be collected before the final boss area would be unlocked. The Glyph altars mainly survived the cuts, and most retained the same layout, but some had their positions changed. The Force Glyph altar was originally in the Drowned Abbey, and underwater, requiring telekinetic projectiles to complete the puzzle. It was moved to the Necropolis for the retail game. The Sound Glyph altar was originally between the Sanctuary of the Clans and the Tomb of the Seraphan, but was moved to beneath the Silenced Cathedral in the retail game. The entire lighthouse area leading to the Sunlight Glyph altar was originally accessed from the water trap in the initial training area, but this was moved to the Cathedral moat. Naprapta's Retreat and the associated Stone Glyph altar kept its position, as did the Fire Glyph altar and the Water Glyph altar. However, there is one Glyph altar that's missing. The Spirit Glyph altar was originally intended to be accessed from a cave in the snowy northern wastes, and involved tricking a vampire into annihilating itself to use its song to power up the altar. The cave was truncated and a bonfire placed in it for the retail game, but the forge itself wasn't completely removed. It was moved to a chamber in the human citadel beneath the canal where the cut Undercity level would have been, and it was repurposed as a bonus room with a health piece on a fountain. Remember that area for later on. In contrast to the Glyph altars, only one of the Elemental Reaver forges made it into the retail game. These were intended to be areas to gain special elemental enhancements for the Wraithblade that were more powerful and could be regained at any time by striking the appropriate element. Indeed, the charging killing move of the blade in the retail game was not actually intended to be present at all, and was only added after the cuts. It was originally envisaged that the player would need these elements to kill vampires with the Reaver. Most of these missing forges are present in the lost levels, albeit disconnected from the rest of the game world, and they aren't able to imbue the Elemental Reavers. The only surviving forge was the Fire Forge found beneath the Drowned Abbey in the retail game. However, this was not always meant to be the case, and it was actually the Water Forge that was meant to be beneath the Abbey. The Fire Forge would have instead been found in Turelim Territory, in a room off the Drawbridge Tower. Its position was taken by a small bonus room in the retail game. The Sunlight Forge was intended to be found in the chapel beneath the tomb of the Seraphan, behind the Valkyrie mural. It was cut and replaced by the Bonus 2 room in the retail game, with only an Eldritch refill station hidden in an alcove. The Sound Forge was meant to be high up in the upper levels of the Silenced Cathedral, with the corridor leading to it completely removed in the retail game. It's one of the few areas that actually has some development after the snapshot scene in the Lost Levels, with some acoustic wall designs added in the April alpha build. The Spirit Forge was originally found in a high area off the Square City 2 area in the Human Citadel. Like the Spirit Glyph altar, it's thought that the Spirit Forge would have required sacrificing a nearby human through possession to activate it. The forge was replaced with a small bonus room in the retail game that was actually made out of a section from the similarly deleted Kain's Retreat level. Remember this room for later. The Stone Forge is a bit of an anomaly, hence it doesn't appear in the Lost Levels, and it was in the process of being moved when the cuts occurred. It was originally placed in a cave off the cut canyon leading to the Oracle's Cave, but was copied to a room off the rear courtyard of the ruined city, and further development was undertaken, before both versions were taken out by the cuts. In the retail game, a small bonus room can be found occupying its last position. As mentioned before, at the end of the retail game, Raziel proceeds into the Oracle's Cave, discovers the Chronoplast beneath, watches some tantalizing futures in the visions of the Chronoplast, battles Kain in the main chamber, and then pursues Kain through a time portal into the past for that infamous to-be-continued ending. But of course, that's not how it was originally supposed to end. For starters, as we discovered in the alphas, there were originally no vision portals leading up to the main Chronoplast chamber, and it turns out this wasn't because they didn't exist, but because they were actually intended to be integrated into the main Chronoplast chamber. The Chronoplast visions and the corridor containing them were actually created after the cuts, and with the cuts already having been made, the future visions were created out of existing assets to hint at the cut content and potential futures, while not necessarily actually showing the parts involved. As such, the aerial cutscene was actually filmed in a copy of the Turelim Territory, when it was originally supposed to have been in Kain's Retreat. The final scene, supposed to show the pinnacle of the Silenced Cathedral and the climax of the game, actually only showed a small section of the smokestack to represent the cathedral, and neither of those scenes actually included the amplified Reaver variants that had been planned, just modified prop versions of the Elemental Reavers created to resemble them, known informally as the Aerial and Kain Reavers. Only the Kain vision showed an actual part of Kain's Retreat, but that was heavily shadowed to obscure the background. These scenes would of course be revisited and reintegrated to a certain extent in further games in the series. See our video on the Chronoplast visions for more on those. After Raziel had seen these potential visions, Kain would emerge to do battle. But here was another surprise, as the dialogue as originally intended is actually much shorter than seen in the final game. And it seems that the developers intentionally moved the dialogue for the final battle with Kain to earlier in the game and added it to the Chronoplast confrontation to avoid wasting the lines and give a more epic final showdown for the retail game. And the first part of the conversation was actually intended for a later cut battle. At the end of the Chronoplast battle, Raziel would have attempted to consume Kain's soul before Kain broke free, with the iconic "You nearly had me, Raziel" line, and used bat or mist form to escape. This escape would have granted Raziel the ability to shift at will and move freely between realms without the need of planar portals. This power, as originally intended, would have opened up the world map, allowing Raziel to reach many areas, including several forges that were previously inaccessible. Its deletion meant that the planar portals were reshuffled to allow access to many areas earlier. Pictures that had circulated for years, suspected to show the gaining of shift at will at a simplified Chronoplast, do not in fact actually show that, but something else entirely. But that's a story for later. And so, we reach the real subject of our tale in those final cancelled lost levels. The defeat of Kain would have prompted the Elder God to tell Raziel to return to the human citadel, implying that he would already have been expected to have visited it by this point. Indeed, at one point in development, it was even planned for the humans of the citadel to be more talkative and give more information, just like the NPCs of Blood Omen. And even early in the game, if Raziel had explored the citadel at night, thanks to the cut day and night cycle, he could find the vampire worshippers moving around the city, and in particular, coming and going from the temple building in the City 9 area, where they would move beyond a gate seen in the April prototype that was locked and inaccessible to Raziel. Here is where the mysterious figures speech was intended to play.
I watched unseen as shadowy figures slipped down the temple walls. The city slumbered, oblivious to the danger creeping just outside. Mysterious figures moved under cover of darkness, their robes betraying occult intent. This temple seemed to be a source of contagion. I would find a way to infiltrate this vampire lair.
And so it was that Raziel was forced to find another way into the worshippers' compound. He would use the canal at the back of City 9 to reach an underwater reservoir where he could use shift at will and the swimming ability to pass through the pipes to reach the Undercity below the citadel. In the retail game, this whole level was replaced by the fountain bonus made from the repurposed spirit glyph altar. Emerging in the Undercity, Raziel would be faced by the vampire worshippers as the main enemy, along with various vampires. One of the notable missing elements would be the worshippers' ability to gruesomely sacrifice themselves to their vampire masters if the vampires became injured. A notable hazard that was cut. Ultimately, it seems that the worshippers were actually intended to only appear here and in the main citadel. They were moved to the Silence Cathedral once the cuts were made. The Undercity would have featured its own warp gate, which notably resembled an inverted version of the main citadel symbol, and the whole area was notably inspired by Giovanni Piranesi's prisons, which went on to inspire the vault level of Uncharted, also by Amy Hennig. To progress through the Undercity, Raziel would ultimately need to block various dams to raise the water level, so he could swim further and further up, passing through notable chambers, including a large temple with a familiar face from the Fireglyph altar, and a particular puzzle requiring the player to freeze a block in mid-air, as had been discussed in developer interviews. The puzzle itself is difficult to pull off successfully in the game, and if you fail to freeze it at the right height, you have to push the block back all the way up and try again. Once Raziel flooded the main underground chamber, he would be able to reach the top of the Undercity and ascend to the boss of the area, the High Priestess of the Vampire Worshippers, who would be placed on a balcony and use her possession ability to open doors and summon waves of enemies to attack Raziel. Indeed, with some trickery, it's possible to make out Doomahim, flamethrower hunters, and villager NPCs behind the closed doors in the lost levels. This area is much more finished than seen previously in the alphas, with several new murals.
Heretic! Welcome to your undoing. Your sorcery is useless in this holy place.
My faith in destiny is all I need to prevail.
Faith? Faith left you when you were excommunicated by our Lord Kain.
I was executed, not excommunicated. You will learn the difference.
After defeating these enemies, Raziel will be able to climb to reach the priestess and kill her, gaining the ability to possess vampires and humans.
Your faith has failed you. Where are your precious vampires now? Where is your holy Kain?
You are the one who has betrayed his faith, his brethren, his creator. I have served my gods.
And now, you will meet them.
In her long service to her vampire masters, the priestess had learned a measure of sorcery. In devouring her soul, this power is conferred on you. You may project your spirit, and in so doing, take possession of your victim's body.
From here, Raziel would leave through a gated doorway. Previously, the alphas had given the impression of a high ledge to jump from here, but the lost levels instead reveal a spiral staircase leading down and through a tunnel out to the bottom gate, back to the City 9 area, giving the impression that the staircase was inside the circular tower on the corner. The entire tower building ended up cut from the retail game. Raziel's next stop would be to travel to the snowy northern wastes, and the final clearings there, where instead of the Oracle's cave found in retail, he would find the entrance to Turelim's clan territory, dominated by the smokestack looming above. And as he was advised by the Elder God, the only way to reach Kain in his mountain retreat was through the smokestack in Turelim's territory, and presumably some kind of possession puzzle would be required to enter. One of the first rooms inside the territory would contain a large stationary orrery that was an important part of the overall puzzle of the level. Progressing on, Raziel could pass through rooms containing two different types of lava, one of which was suspected to be an instant kill, and through several rooms featured in early trailers, including the bottom of the smokestack itself. The main puzzles of Turelim's lair would involve opening up side rooms overlooking the orrery and gradually turning the fan blades of the smokestack to allow Raziel to access new areas, and also using possession to flood certain areas to fill the central reservoir. When Raziel passed Turelim's chambers, he was actually reluctant to confront his brother, believing he had enough blood on his hands. But with Turelim eager to defend Kain, Raziel relented and they battled. The whole cutscene is now available to view in the lost levels.
Let me pass, Turelim. I have enough blood on my hands today. My quarrel lies with Kain.
Poor Raziel. Your rage blinds you to the bond of gratitude that we owe our master.
Gratitude? Toward one who would have you grovel at his gate like a dog? You once had noble aspirations, Turel. Now, how humbled are your goals? Do you prosper on the scraps he casts you?
Your insults will do nothing to blunt the agonies of your demise.
You killed me once. Behold the result. I have no more to fear from you.
But there is a strangely complicated twist to the battle, as Raziel was intended to counter Turel's TK with his own, to slow the shots down, and then use those shots to imbue the Reaver, to briefly gain a unique Reaver variant. He could then use the amplified projectiles from that to topple the outer columns and blast open the reservoir door to start the second phase beneath the system. In this confrontation, the target was to lure Turel into hitting the supports beneath the reservoir. Once enough were destroyed, the reservoir would crack and water would flow out, burning Turel to death and allowing Raziel to consume his soul, which gifted him the amplified force projectile ability. This allowed Raziel to blast open some previously immovable doors. Continuing on through the territory, Raziel would finally be able to open and constrict the dials in the side rooms overlooking the orrery. And returning to the orrery, he could constrict the object itself, causing it to spin and rotate, activating the smokestack and powering the blades above. Returning to the smokestack, he could now glide to a great height towards a pair of openings at the top of the smokestack, leading to Kain's retreat. So here it is, the final major area of the game. The alpha version of Kain's mountain retreat was unfinished, an isolated set of rooms only accessible through debug menus, consisting of one curved hallway, a small circular room, and an untextured throne room. But we had an idea of at least one other room, because exploration of the Chronoplast visions revealed a courtyard decorated with Kain symbols, which were largely obscured by shadow in the retail build. And here it is in all its glory. The updraft from the smokestack was intended to deposit Raziel in a small mountainous area below the top of the chimney. From here, he can climb up the nearby construction to a familiar courtyard, the same one as seen in the Chronoplast visions, only properly lit. But this isn't the boss room it was portrayed as in the visions. Instead, this was the site of the last blockade in the player's progress, because here stood a series of magical seals preventing Raziel from accessing the main retreat. Only by having imbued all of the elemental Reaver enhancements for the Wraithblade would Raziel be able to progress into the retreat proper. Climbable walls gave access to a small alcove on the right, presumably for a power-up, and a passage on the opposite side led to a Kain symbol warp gate, the final chance to save and return before the end of the game, and to give Raziel quick access in case he didn't yet possess all of the necessary Reaver enhancements. With a little effort, it's possible to get beyond the door, which leads us up a series of stairways to the familiar curved corridor from the Alpha. But this time it isn't incomplete. Ornate decorations and figures cover the walls, and windows are covered up by apparent unfinished shutters. As mentioned in our previous videos, much of the theming of this area would be adopted into the Chronoplast when the cuts were made. The passage on the right will leave for now, but on the left is the passage leading towards Kain's throne room. Initially, we see the same circular room as in the Alpha, although again slightly more polished. The alcoves in the wall here were intended to contain armour sets from Blood Omen, as a callback to that first game, according to the recollections of Daniel Kabuko, who thought of the retreat as Kain's personal museum, containing his previous exploits and gathered artifacts. Moving on, the next corridor has been textured and stabilised compared to the alpha, revealing an ascending hallway leading up to the throne room itself. In the throne room there's another surprise. Unlike in the alpha, the room is fully textured, and it's almost complete. And as hinted previously, it all looks quite familiar. This room, it turns out, was featured in previous promotional imagery, and was even used on the back cover of the game in some regions, with its Chronoplast-like theming leading some to believe it was based there. In fact, the room is Kain's throne room from the retreat, and it's the last boss area in the game. Some things to note here are the decorations around the walls. One stained glass depicts a vampire armed with swords that would have its colours toned down before being adopted into the hallways of the Chronoplast visions in the retail game. That version of the mural can also be seen here behind Kain's throne. The other familiar stained glass has a pair of dragons, but the flame-like shape is distinct, and it seems this stained glass was adapted and slightly redesigned to serve as the barrier preventing access to the Fireforge in the retail game. The boss battle here would begin with Kain on his throne, with the conversation starting off with the dialogue that eventually ended up at the start of the Chronoplast battle in the retail game. And if you thought the windows and the items around the room looked suspiciously elemental, then you'd be correct. We could perhaps infer that the style of the battle would be somewhat similar to the previous battles at the Pillars and the Chronoplast. But the trick here would be to imbue the Reaver with the various different elemental enhancements from around the room. The exact methods are not completely clear, but given the elements, we may be able to guess that the sconces were used to imbue the Fire Reaver, that the bells could be used to imbue the Sound Reaver, that the throne, similar to the anvil in the Stoneforge, could perhaps be used to imbue the Stone Reaver, that the windows could be broken to imbue the Sunlight Reaver. And there's an interesting structure in the centre of the room that may well have contained a fountain to imbue the Water Reaver. That leaves us with only one elemental Reaver to imbue, the Spirit Reaver, which was imbued by Striking Souls. And here is where that long-known plot twist from the Chronoplast vision comes in. With no other souls available, Ariel would manifest in this room to offer Raziel the final element he needed to defeat Kain: her own soul. With both Ariel and Kain encouraging Raziel to do so, and with no other options left, Raziel struck down Ariel to gain the Amplified Reaver, a brilliant yellow blade.
Raziel, I am your only hope. Only my spirit can empower the Soul Reaver to destroy Kain and restore balance to Nosgoth. You know this is true.
Do you have the will to do it, Raziel? Could it be, after all your posturing, you do not possess the resolve for this final act? Can you have come this far, only to fail now?
What game are you playing, Kain?
No game, Raziel.
Listen to her, Raziel. Strike me down if you can, but without her essence, the blow will barely sting.
More of your lies.
Only truth. Believe me, Raziel. Believe.
The rest of the encounter would be a cutscene, finally showing Kain being struck down by the Amplified Reaver, destroying his body while his soul was shown being leached into the Reaver, changing it to a red and black blade. The final Reaver enhancement, which encompassed all the previous blades. Raziel remarked on the co-mingling of Balance Guardians, before moving on at the behest of the Elder God.
You have your father in you after all.
My father? You're nothing but a grave robber, Kain.
True enough.
Such a dire fate. Their souls commingling, fettered eternally. Just as Kain's refusal at the Pillars had bound them together centuries before.
And now we can explore the rest of that wing from the curved corridor, potentially bypassing some kind of amplified Reaver sealed door which would prevent premature entry. This leads up a staircase to another room, and you'll be able to spot the theming change and the murals from the silenced cathedral returning, although subtly changed with different hands, signalling we're getting close to the pinnacle of the cathedral. Another staircase leading upward takes us to a different familiar room. Its textures are unfinished, but its shape is distinctive enough. This room, known here as Treat 14, did make it into the final game, albeit somewhat shrunken down. It served in the retail game as the bonus room City 4, which took the place of the cut Spirit Forge. With what we now know as the Retreat textures, it should have been something of a giveaway as to where it originally came from. This takes us to the final ascent, a grand and steep staircase leading up to the roof of the cathedral, in a full gameplay sequence. And from here, and with photo mode, you can see how impressive and imposing the architecture is. The door at the top opens only to empty space, but there is a little more to see that's not present in the lost levels. The final room is not connected here, but it does exist in separate files. It's a room we've seen in the early version of in alpha builds, but it's now in a much more complete state. And the suggestion here is that it would have been the very top level of the silenced cathedral, and the place to activate the colossal organ pipes of the building to wipe out the vampires of Nosgoth. Previous builds had hinted that at one stage there were plans for Raziel to return to the top levels of the cathedral at some point after gaining the amplified Reaver, and a secret passage behind Zephon's head to completely unblock the pipes and make the top level mechanism usable, making use of the second cathedral warp gate near Zephon's room. However, it's unclear how long this concept survived, or if it had been jettisoned before the final cuts. At some point, Raziel would have been swarmed by many vampires who tried to prevent him from activating the cathedral, but to no avail, with him giving a final speech about activating the cathedral to send a hymn of death across the land. But it's uncertain exactly when and how this cutscene would have played out.
From this summit, the pinnacle of the silenced cathedral is within your reach. Hurry, Raziel. With the Soul Reaver thus enhanced, no obstacle can thwart your progress, no enemy obstruct your path. But take heed, the vampires of this world can sense your intentions and will hound you in their desperate fury.
As they swarmed after me, I felt the terror that must have filled their wizened hearts. They knew what I had to do here, that it would spell their downfall, and that I too might perish in the very act. This tower had stood too long as a grotesque symbol of Kain's perverse intent. The time was ripe, indeed past due, for me to exploit my newborn talents and send a hymn of death across this land. Enough to banish sanity. Enough to set the children of the night plucking at their eyes, tearing open their own throats. Enough to destroy every vampiric creature on the face of this bruised and bleeding land. My goal was within reach. All that remained was to open each and every sounding pipe.
Activating the sounding pipes at the top mechanism would have ended the game, and players would be treated to one final FMV cinematic. Raziel gliding down from the pinnacle of the cathedral to the cliffs of the abyss, landing on the opposite side this time symbolically representing him crossing over. A disturbing cacophony of sound would then follow, as a gigantic fountain of thousands of howling vampire souls flowed from the world, directly into the abyss to feed the Elder God. Raziel would be watching with a mixture of triumph and awe, and then finally horror, as the Elder gave its final haunting congratulations. A deliberate hint that it might all have been a huge mistake, before the final fade to black and the end of the game.
It is done, Raziel. Your destiny is fulfilled. Though you have destroyed every creature who might call you kin, the world is born anew. The cycle of birth and death, stalled and stagnant these long years, once again begins to flow. You have done well, my servant.